where uncivil words prevail, show me how to model love. Help me remember the God-given dignity of all and invite others to do the same. Show me how to build bridges and not walls, and see first what unites us rather than how we diverge. Let me seek to understand before asking to be understood. Give me a listening heart filled with empathy and compassion. May I be clear in sharing my own position and respectful and civil in describing those of others. Let me never tolerate hateful ideas. May I invite all to charity and love. Lord, help me to imitate your compassion and mercy. Make me an instrument of your peace. Amen. Thank you all for joining us today for this very important discussion, dialogue. I want to stress just that. This is a discussion, dialogue. The purposes being to simply inform, to educate, but I would also say first and foremost to understand. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. My name is Mr. Pettigrew. For those that do not know, I'm one of the assistant principals here at Brebeuf Jesuit. And at the outset of this, I would like to also make sure we have some certain norms that we share. And I'm sure you guys have heard many of these already, and these are Ignatian principles of civil dialogue. So when we keep that in mind, especially with the panel and also the Q&A, just that civility amongst ourselves. Those include being slow to speak, listen attentively, seek the truth in what others are saying, disagree humbly, respectfully, and thoughtfully, and of course to allow the conversation the time it needs. Now, I just want to add a couple of others, making sure that we're coming from the I perspective. We do not have crosstalk for this. You're sharing ideas, okay? And then lastly, I think this is also very important. We need to assume the good for one another. To assume the good. With that said, I'd like for both clubs to have a brief introduction, including your meeting times.
Hi everyone, my name is...
It's unmuted. They're working on it.
There we go. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. All right, so my name is Caroline. I am one of the 3 presidents of Young Democrats. We meet on Wednesdays during the only PRT. And up here today we have Claire Curran, Ryan Durham, and Mike Herbert. We're all going to be representing the pro-choice side of things. And we hope you'll see our perspective and maybe come to some of our meetings and hear some of our perspectives again this year.
And then I'm Maria Thomas, so I am one of the co-presidents of the Right to Life Club here at Brebeuf. We have Eric Eichenberg, who is our other co-president. Also on the panel, we have Dominic Sicuso and Vera Salito. So yeah, like you can imagine, we represent the pro-life, anti-abortion side of things. Especially our goal for this dialogue is to really make it so that both sides can be heard, so both sides can be respected and understood.
Very good. Thank you to both clubs. Before we get started with our panel discussion, it's always imperative to make sure that we are informed of the issues, the information, the research that's going on. And I believe that all of you should have the legal updates, especially in regards to the state of Indiana. And just a few updates here, and I'll share a little brief with the audience. Indiana was the first state to call for a special legislative session over abortion legislation after Dobbs v. Jackson was decided on June 4th this year. It took place the last week of July and culminated in the passing of Senate Bill 1. Just a little bit about Senate Bill 1. It's an abortion ban with exceptions in cases of rape, incest, up to 10 weeks, with no affidavit or police report required, and fatal fetal abnormality up to 20 weeks. It has no language about chemical abortion. It defines the beginning of pregnancy as implantation. It also allows for abortion if a woman's health is in danger through all stages of pregnancy. And all abortions must be performed within the safety of a hospital. In regards to the ACLU and the religious freedom suit, Jewish religious perspective, it is the belief that life begins at conception and is not a theological opinion shared by all religions or religious persons. A group called Hoosier Jews for Choice and 5 individual plaintiffs filed a lawsuit challenging the Senate Bill 1 abortion ban on religious freedom grounds. The judge overseeing the case ruled that there is reasonable likelihood that decisions about family planning are protected under the Indiana State Constitution, while the state Supreme Court considers the merits of the case. Both sides in the lawsuit are scheduled to make their oral arguments in front of the court in January. Until then, abortion remains legal in the state of Indiana. Indiana Supreme Court will begin hearing this case this January once again. And with that said, we'll begin our panel discussion. And I think this first question is something that we both can sort of agree on, that neither side really looks at Senate Bill 1 as something that's complete or whole or right for all of us. And with that said, Young Dems, why is Senate Bill 1 bad?
Thank you so much, Mr. Pettigrew. So, for Senate Bill 1, we have a few different perspectives we want to share. We have the idea of the technicalities and the actual language of the bill, and next, the big picture of the bill. What does this mean when it sets precedent? What does this mean in the language and what it means for our whole culture? So, of the possibilities seen, this bill is not an all-out ban. Senate Bill 1 allows for some exceptions, but that does not by any means justify it as an acceptable bill to be passed within a House or Congress or any state. So the problems we have with it on the first side are more technical. So the first part of that is the 10 weeks part. If you might recall from what Mr. Pettigrew said, there is an exception that says if in the case of rape or incest, abortion can be performed up to 10 weeks. The 10 weeks part we take a little bit of issue with because when it comes to issues of sexual assault, when it comes to issues of rape, you cannot put time limits on victims. We see this as a really big issue within our side of the debate because putting time limits on survivors to recognize the trauma that they went through and then take that appropriate action, for some it may take way longer than that to happen, and that's okay. It's not the fault of the victim that this time frame is being put on them to take action in that case. The second technical part we take issue with is the hospital clause. Essentially, this says that any and all abortions have to happen within the hospital. So, through research in different mediums, we found that this disproportionately affects Hoosiers living in rural areas or far from designated areas that have these hospitals that can't perform these abortions. And it just creates more roadblocks in general for people who are trying to get that life-saving care that is one of the exceptions in Senate Bill 1. So also we find issue with undermining healthcare professionals, which is a major theme we see throughout this bill. So it mandates the kind of revocation of a doctor's license who performs an abortion deemed unlawful. And we have just seen throughout history and throughout all cases of abortion pre-Roe that when we undermine healthcare professionals, we're setting our system up for failure. We're setting our system up for more deaths and for more accidents to happen. And we just don't see that as a just cause on our side of the debate. And another thing we want to talk about is kind of the big picture of Senate Bill 1 and what this means for the long run. In essence, we find that this bill is politicizing a moral issue. And a lot of things can be said about the morality of abortion, but last year, if you remember during the dialogue, we had a lot of discussion about what it means to be alive versus what it means to be a person. And although we did dignify that alive is a scientific term, personhood is completely different and it is a moral term. And through this bill, we are dictating what personhood is, and we are enforcing that belief on everyone who lives in Indiana. The second is that the vocalization that senators had throughout these entire hearings is very dangerous socially. I was personally at some of the testimony for Senate Bill 1, and what I heard a lot of was Republican senators coming up to the stand and saying, I'm a Catholic, and as a Catholic, I cannot vote against that bill, and we find that problematic. Next is a dangerous precedent set. As I'm sure some of you guys remember, when the overturning of Roe v. Wade happened, a lot of things were said by a lot of Supreme Court justices that included we might rethink how we view things like birth control. We view things as same-sex marriage. This bills and bills such as this could set a dangerous precedent for privacy and issues in the LGBTQ community with transgender patients. And basically, we just see that this is not where it stops. It continues on from here, and for these reasons, we are pro-choice because we see the overwhelming effect this will have on our society, not just with abortions, but with other things.
All right. Senate Bill 1. We believe that Senate Bill 1 is a step in the right direction, and it will save lives. but it does not recognize the equality of all because of the exceptions and loopholes. This bill does not protect the lives of those conceived in circumstances of rape and incest. Next, the bill has no language about chemical abortions, which are the most common types of abortion. Lastly, this allows abortions in cases of lethal fetal anomalies. This means that if a child is going to die in the womb, it is legal to kill this child. Yeah. And we would never do this in similar circumstances of a person outside of the womb. Let's take, for example, let's say if a toddler had cancer that was going to kill him, we would never kill them ahead of time. We would give them all the care that they need in order to save them, but we would never try to end their suffering by killing them. It's about fixing the problem, not saying that their life is a problem.
Thank you. And I will remind the audience, please refrain from any crosstalk at this time. Let's listen, let's understand, okay? Thank you. Next question. You're responding. Correct. Yes, ma'am.
I guess we respond to this kind of with the idea that we do fully agree with this idea that we in the Indiana State Legislature should be working towards decisions that provide Hoosiers with good access to quality of life. But I guess where the discrepancy comes is with that thing that we mentioned in this bigger picture, which is the idea of personhood is not a medically concrete definition. Life and personhood are two separate things. It requires philosophical, theological, ethical, some medical questions and perspectives to be called into play. And it's not one where we are one day going to settle on a concrete definition because people, for religious reasons or philosophical reasons, are going to have differences in their own life in which they disagree on that definition. So when we're looking at personhood and we're looking at how we make legislation about that, we keep in mind that over the course of someone's whole life, from the start of their life to how people choose to end their lives, it is interesting in which the ways our legislators seek to define very personal decisions. The personal medical decision of any family, whether that is in the relation to getting the abortion or to how they are going to treat the cancer of their toddler, is the decision for that family. It is the right of that family fundamentally to evaluate ethically how they want to decide, religiously how they want to decide, and then move forth with that care in order to create the best decision for them, to fulfill their morals, to fulfill their religious principles, and that is their right. And we maintain on this side that we must not set the dangerous moral precedent that is saying we all must believe one thing is concretely ethical, and more so lean into this idea that people are allowed to make decisions within the privacy of their home as they relate to their family's beliefs, and they have the right to preserve that. Senate Bill 1 creates a dangerous precedent for how we legislate every issue by saying there is a moral blanket statement that we all operate under now, and that's where our issue comes from on this side.
Then I would say that on this side, we agree. We do not like over-moralizing the issue. We do not like over-religiousing, is that a word? The issue, right? Especially with this idea of personhood, right? So we are coming at it. It's really interesting, it's interesting to see that we come together in terms of, we don't like Senate Bill 1. But it's interesting to see how other different kinds of groups come together, even under the pro-life movement. There's an organization that was created recently called POW, the Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising, and they believe that being anti-abortion is just a logical consequence of them holding the values of equality, non-violence, and non-discrimination. And that is definitely our perspective here as a Right to Life Club at Rebuff. As you guys mentioned, right, it is objective from a scientific and biological standpoint that from the moment of conception, there is a being that is living, that is human, and that is a whole organism. And that this idea of personhood is philosophical, it's up for debate, yes. One of the things though, we can't debate it, I don't want to get into it here, but one of the things that we all do agree on is that we want to create a more just society here in Indiana, and then obviously in America on a greater level. And I think that is the perspective that we should be looking at it with. Regardless of people's perspectives on personhood, we should agree that America at least claims to value human equality and equal human rights. So we can, I guess there have definitely been groups throughout history that have said, well, this group of human beings has rights versus this group doesn't. That has happened throughout history. But if we want to be a country that recognizes the equal human rights of all, we should skip the religious side of things, and we should just go right to whether or not all human beings should be protected, regardless of our views of whether they have. I mean, this is the thing, right? It comes down to, does this group of human beings, does this demographic of human beings, the preborn, have value? And if we want to live in a country that recognizes equality, I think we have to recognize that. In terms of the very specific things that you guys did mention, with the cases of rape, right, obviously those are tragic. Those are cases that no one wants to happen on the pro-life side or the pro-choice side. That is a violence that has been done to a more vulnerable person that should have never happened. And the person who has done that should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, because that is, again, a tragedy. The reason that we are against the exception for abortion in cases of rape is because we don't think that that violence should create a cycle of violence. We don't believe that violence should continue by creating another victim, one of the most voiceless groups in society, preborn human beings. We don't believe that that justifies taking their life. So yeah, again, with our view on Senate Bill 1, because we believe in human equality, we want to make it so that no group of human beings has it legislated into the law that it's okay for their lives particularly to be taken. And so that's the main issue that we have with Senate Bill 1, is it says that we're going to protect the preborn human beings except for these particular groups of them.
Thank you. Our next question, both groups have somewhat alluded to already, and that is the government's role and responsibility in this discussion. And in this case, what is the state government's role versus that of the federal government's role in this issue?
Alrighty then. So, as apparently it is within the power of the states to create their own legislation on abortion, as Roe v. Wade was struck down. However, one of the biggest things and the current reason for the temporary injunction in the state of Indiana is the idea of religious freedom. While we would rather this not be considered a religious issue, the federal government does have clearer rules for not involving religion in the case of abortion. The state does not, and as Caroline was saying, many state senators went up onto their podiums and said, as a Catholic. Now, personally, as a Jew representing JSU up here, this is very problematic and worrying for me and many other people of different religions in America around this nation. One of the biggest things is that this limits religious freedom. The states having this power limits religious freedom that is not within the Catholic view. And the federal has these clear rules, these clear guidelines, so that freedom of religion is maintained. Now, state senators are called to represent their constituency without added wisdom when producing legislative decisions, as they have more access to those who they are serving. Smaller groups who are easier to pin down with more general consensus on these issues. However, federal senators are descriptionally permitted to be able to add knowledge and a personal interpretation due to having a much larger constituency. Now, it is impossible to say an entire state will have the same beliefs 9 out of 10 times. There will often be quite a bit of a split. Now, the federal government has a much more of a platform and much more ability to protect these massive problems within the issue, such as freedom of religion.
Okay, so he actually said a lot of what I was going to say about how just the overturning of Roe v. Wade and how that affected how it's legislated in this country. So it basically, my view of it was that it just gave more power back to the states, which means that it gives more power to the people to elect their representatives that have more effect on them directly. So, like the red states will have more bans on abortion than blue states, obviously. But then, so the pro-life view on it is that it's better now that the federal government doesn't have a lock on just saying that abortion must be a right for everybody, and that another possibility is that the federal government can go the other way and ban abortion across the country. So that would be the full pro-life view on it, because it's a life issue, a human rights issue, and the federal government could step in and do something. But as of now, it's up to the states and
The issue that we see in a lot of that state, the states being able to represent their constituency, is the fact that their constituency often goes misrepresented or underrepresented. While the case might be made that in red states there will be more bans on abortion, in blue states there won't be. The idea is that many of these senators, many of these lawmakers have taken their own personal experience and personal viewpoints into account, cluttering up their laws and making it so that their constituency is not accurately represented.
So what I would say to that is that those representatives were voted upon, and so if people knew what their views were, it does represent the people. But I'm going to go back to what Dominic said, that because this does violently violate the rights of the vulnerable, it really must be banned overall across the country, hopefully by an amendment, because it really is a big problem in this country and is a human rights issue.
Thank you. This next question is very important, but I'll also remind us to make sure we're coming from this from an I perspective, and that is abortion a right? Again, is abortion a right?
So to answer this simply, abortion is a right because healthcare is a right. When it comes to a woman's health physically and mentally, that is the healthcare that the pro-choice side is more focused on, because it is just so important to focus on the health of mothers involved. Also, not only is banning abortion a problem, but it's also a kind of violation of privacy among many, many women across the entire United States. Because banning abortion, especially a ban without any exceptions, sets the dangerous precedent, as Caroline mentioned earlier, that the privacy is just not as important anymore. And this is a problem for women and a lot of people in the LGBTQ community, because it kind of sets a precedent that a conversation between a woman and her doctor, or someone who is going through gender reassignment surgery, or someone who is going through a private procedure, like that should be a conversation between a person and her doctor, not between a person and a governing body.
Thank you for that response. And I definitely agree that everyone has the right to do what they want with their body. But for our pro-life stance on this is that because we believe that every human has a right, an equal right, that abortion violently violates the rights of the vulnerable. And we believe that the vulnerable also has rights. So no one has a right to violence against the vulnerable, like I said. So, although we do believe this, we really want, we as women, especially those in crisis pregnancies, to have good, trusting, reliable resources. And like women care centers and Standing With You are examples of those resources, and we want to move forward to something that isn't violent and more supportive. And this is a very hard topic, but we really want to have that harmony with everyone so we can move forward in the future and work together as because it also hurts everyone with this topic, with the division, and we really want to work together to have the future for everyone to be in peace and take away all the tragic situations that everyone that has these birth problems, has these, you know what I mean, has these difficult pregnancies, and we will follow up with the risk later, with follow up how Maria would talk about.
I guess what we kind of say in response to this is we completely agree on this idea that perpetrating violence through legislation is never acceptable. But the most important thing to keep in mind is the precedent this sets. We're going to call back to this because at the end of the day, the reason we're having this dialogue is a lot of you in this room are going to get in a voting booth tomorrow and make a decision largely based off of this. This has become a major voting issue, and this is an indicator of how politicians are going to vote as they move forward. So we really want to make sure that we're informing about the precedent that this sets for future legislation in the Indiana governing body. As Ryan said, and as Carolina said, and as Eli has said, this creates the allowance for the perpetration of violence through legislation at a level that is honestly just so frightening beyond words. We look at this idea of like privacy in healthcare. We see that our state has already attacked transgender youth. And we wonder what it means if a decision between you and your doctor is no longer private, what that means for trans kids accessing life-saving healthcare. What does that mean then? If we tear down this right, we take away the rights of women. We fundamentally take the rights away of most oppressed people within a society. And if we take those rights away, we allow our governing body to say, this is the moral precedent we have set. We have written this into law, we have agreed upon this, and this is how we morally behave. And if this is how we morally behave under Senate Bill 1, then we allow for the perpetration of active violence against people right now that are living in this state. It is violence to not allow transgender kids to get the health care that they need. It is violence to not allow women to have privacy in their medical decisions. These decisions are personal and they are private, and you have the right to make them between yourself and a doctor. It is violent to take away this right, and that's kind of where we stand on this issue of perpetration of violence.
Yeah, so that is definitely a very important consideration. What I would, one of the things, obviously, that we're coming at as a website is abortion is not a right at all because it is violence itself. I think that the idea that abortion is healthcare is absolutely wrong because it ends up taking the life of a living human being, regardless of religious views. This is like the scientific result. Sorry, my voice is a little squeaky because I woke up with a bad throat, but you know. But yeah, one of the things is definitely that abortion, here's the thing, abortion is not a privacy issue. Abortion is not a private issue because it involves someone impacting and violating the rights of another person. I mean, I'm a woman, right? I am very pro choice for all sorts of actions, for all sorts of medical decisions. But this one issue, abortion, I am anti-abortion. There's a reason, right? So it's because this specific issue is an issue that is violent. I don't think it sets a precedent that we can start, you know, I don't think it sets a precedent that we can start interfering with other people's private decisions. Because if you look at, you guys mentioned like transgender care, things like that. Those are different issues because those aren't issues where you're talking about a procedure that directly kills a human being. That is our thing with abortion. Again, there are groups like the Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising that are very on the left on all sorts of issues, but they believe that abortion is the one issue that they're going to take a stand on against, but the rest of their movement says because abortion is against equality, it says that this particular demographic of human beings doesn't have the same equal rights that other human beings have. Abortion is violence because it directly takes their life, and it is discrimination because it says that, again, these particular human beings shouldn't have access to the rights that the rest of us have access to. So Definitely, again, if abortion was a private decision, I would agree. I would agree with the pro-choice side. But because it impacts the life of another person such that it takes their life in a violent violation of their rights, it is not something that we have a right to at all.
Thank you, Brother Light. Our next part of our agenda for here is to have a little short Q&A. A few questions for our scholarly panelists here. First question is for pro-life. Is your stance really, instead of a religious stance, is it really a religious stance? If so, if you weren't religious, would you have the same viewpoint? I'll read it again. Is your stance really a religious stance? If so, if you were not religious, would you have the same viewpoint?
Well, everyone has a different view on this, but personally for me, I would definitely have the same point of view, because from the science that I learned is that from Dog's Reach, that life starts from the zygote, and there's also the ethics part with the rights that we talked about, that I believe that every human has a right. And I believe because life starts at conception, then they are human. But there's a difference between personhood and human being, but I believe that it is a human being, so it has a right. So that is my part of it, and I think that the government should have a perspective that is non-secular. That is secular. I don't think there should be religion with it. Yeah. There you go.
Thank you. Next question, and this is for the Young Democrats of choice. If the judicial system of America can charge the killer of a pregnant mother with double homicide, how is it that people also believe that a child fetus is not a human being, but a clump of cells without any human rights? If the judicial system of America can charge the killer of a pregnant mother with double homicide, how is it that people also believe that a child fetus is not a human being, but a clump of cells without any human rights?
All right, so I'll go ahead and take this question. So I think that the big idea we need focusing right now is what are we all called? We're sitting here on this side of the stage right now. We're called pro-choice, and we're called that for a reason. We believe it is a choice of the mother who's carrying a certain fetus to determine what that is to her and what that means. So in the terms of this situation, they're talking about someone killed through homicide and it kills the person and her baby. In that case, if that woman was planning on bringing that baby to term, then that is 100% certainly a baby in her eyes, because she refers to that, she believes that as a person, and she wants to bring that person into the world. We see that as double homicide too. We agree with the legal system. We think the legal system is on our side in this case, because it also acknowledges the fact that that mother most likely wanted to bring that child to term. That was a tragedy, because that child was wanted by that mother, and that mother who was carrying it and providing for it, all of its sustenance, also acknowledges the fact that that is a person that she wants to bring into this world. And also, speaking from a little bit of a technical standpoint, I am by no means a legal expert whatsoever, but I do know that some of the legal technical jargon is a little bit difficult in this case, because there is no real way to predetermine or define what exactly at which stage it is on certain legal statuses in different court systems. So it is referred to as a human or a baby in many of the cases that involve double homicide when we see murder cases, but it's because there is no real other way to define that in a certain court system, because there's no real precedent set for when that's happening, because all cases are different. So in all, we believe that actually the legal system is on our side in this case, because it also agrees with us that is the mother's choice how they want to determine this baby, and if they want to bring it to term, that determines its personhood.
Thank you. Pro-life, you actually have a two-part question here. If a child is not allowed to adopt a baby, then why are they forced to have them? Along those lines, how can you justify forcing children into a foster care system that is known to have life-threatening problems?
So again, those are really important concerns when talking about this issue of abortion. Definitely, for the first question, right, asking about adoption specifically, right, the reason that a child cannot, and of course, this question is referring to when you have tragic cases, again, where like an 11-year-old is impregnated through rape. Right? Obviously, again, those are cases that no side wants to see happen, because obviously they are so egregious and they are such terrible instances of violence against vulnerable people. So the reason, right, that a child, like an 11-year-old person, cannot adopt is because they're not ready to raise the child, and that's something that the pro-life movement acknowledges. Obviously, 11-year-olds are not ready to raise children. And again, right, we are not anti all choices, we are anti very specific choice. Right, so in that tragic case, for instance, when an 11-year-old has a child, or when you see the 10-year-old rape victim who crossed state lines into Indiana to get an abortion, right, we want to make sure that this person, first of all, has the care and resources that they need. Right? Obviously, someone in that case is going to need like serious mental support, like mental health support rather, serious support in terms of their community. And we need to be there to make sure that that person does feel supported. Remember, we are pro all options except an option that is violent. And abortion still is an option of violence. So whether that, we promote nonviolent options, whether that is adoption, like an open adoption or a closed adoption, or whether the parents of that 11-year-old are going to help raising the child, as we have seen in certain cases. No one is saying that these situations are easy. No one is saying these situations are easy, because they are situations that should never happen. But then the question is, what do we do to respond to them? Do we act in a way that continues the cycle of violence onto another person? Or do we act in a way that recognizes the human dignity of all and works to support every single person in these circumstances, right? So even if you look at the term sheet that we handed out, right, like there is listed every single type of abortion. Every single abortion does violence to a preborn child, whether that is through starving, suffocating, or dismembering a human being when they are at their most vulnerable, most voiceless point. And that is what we want to address, and that's what we want to stop happening in a country that claims to care about equal human rights.
Take it back over here for the next question for the pro-choice young Dems. The question is, has the language utilized in anti-abortion bills been scientifically correct?
So we are just seeking here a comment on Senate Bill 1, but the stance of the pro-choice side, and I think something that can rather be agreed upon across the board here, is that the language used in Senate Bill 1 was substantially dangerous because of how far it went straight from science. The first thing that we want to point out is this idea of this loose loophole for a mother's health. This idea of what constitutes good and safe health, a good quality of life for the mother, doesn't necessarily have a clear definition, and it's kind of impossible to act upon this part of the legislation. And is largely ineffectual and we believe very harmful, because it allows for legislation like this to slip past because it has the exception. But what happens with this exception is, one, it's an 18-hour period before the mother can get an abortion that she has to begin seeking it. Within that 18-hour period, if the mother believes her life is at stake for physical reasons or mental reasons that are unmeasurable by any test, that mother then has to wait 18 hours after seeking it until she can access that care. That's the first danger we see that is medically incorrect. We see that it doesn't take into account the mental aspect that accounts for pregnancy. Pregnancy is not a health-neutral event in any way, shape, or form, and we must keep in mind that a lot of the health effects of pregnancy cannot be measured on a test, whether they are physical or mental health. So this waiting period is substantially harmful. Additionally, this idea of where abortions must be carried out in order to be lawful is something that we take large issue in. During the testimony, we had multiple medical professionals come in their field and say that it was unnecessary for this clause about it is a hospital that must have 3 hallways wide enough to fit a hospital burning down them. That is what constitutes a facility that is allowed to carry out an abortion due to previous legislation. But we understand in this that most abortions don't need that. They're not surgical procedures. They're done chemically. They're done through medication. And that is something that has shut down a large amount of abortion facilities and has limited care. People like myself that live in Indianapolis would still have access to a hospital that could provide that level of care for me if I needed it. But people that live in rural Indiana, which is a large portion of the Hoosier population, don't have that care access, and it's dangerous and it's life-threatening for them not to have that care access, and for this legislation to specifically contradict what the medical field is saying they need. The people making this bill do not have doctorates, they are not medical doctors, and they have not made this bill with the evaluation necessary beyond abortion as a political issue, and thus the language used within it is believed to be medically inaccurate by the pro-choice side.
We have 2 other questions from our audience. First, or last 2 being, for the pro-life side, how are you able to support something that gives no one a choice, something that makes a decision for everyone, even when they are not happy?
That again, very important consideration. So as I have expressed earlier, right? I believe in all sorts in having the ability under our government to make all sorts of choices, but it stops at violence. And the other thing too is that I don't think we should have the choice to decide whether, again, some human beings are valuable and some human beings aren't. This idea of, well, it's a baby if, or it has value and is a person if the mother wants it, but if not, then they don't have that value. I think it's very dangerous, and it does set a dangerous precedent to say that people's value and whether or not they should be killed is based on whether or not they are wanted, right? That goes back to, again, kind of this question of foster care too, right? Again, it completely ignores the value of the other person, instead saying that the value of this other person is dependent on the people around them, dependent on whether they are wanted, or dependent on their experiences, even. I know someone named Braden Eckert. He was someone who was, he was in foster care. He's been adopted now, but he was in foster care. He was abused in foster care, and my understanding is that he has PTSD from the trauma that he experienced there. But what he says is that my abuse is not your excuse. He believes, he's a member of POWER, the Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising, that abortion is, again, against the principles of nonviolence, equality, and non-discrimination, right? People's, whether or not people are wanted, people's life experiences, whatever it is, that does not justify then that does not justify taking away their rights. Taking away their rights and saying, well, actually, they're not valuable because of this thing that happened to them, because of this thing that could have happened to them. I think it's a very flimsy idea of human rights to say that human rights depend on all those sorts of things, instead of just saying that, yes, if you are a human being, you have human rights. Women have women's rights, children have children's rights, human beings deserve human rights.
Thank you. Pro-choice, last question. Would you, this is a long one. Would you support any restrictions on abortion, such as restricting sex-selective abortion to target female fetuses, abortions based on the diagnosis of the fetus with Down syndrome, or abortions past the point of viability around 23 weeks when the fetus is developed enough to be delivered safely?
It's me again. So I think we handle this and we kind of see this in 2 ways. So one, specific bans that aim to just target, go further. They don't exist in a vacuum. Our legislative body, as we have seen, will use these specific bans that are good faith bans and build off of them. We look back to this ruling about what facilities can carry out abortion care. This was a bill that was passed in Indiana, Ohio, and several other red states before the overturning of Roe v. Wade in order to protect women's rights and edit the way that abortion care was accessible in states. We saw that this bill was supposed to be one-off and good faith, and it wasn't. It was built off of, it was used to construct the fundamental basis of what Senate Bill 1 became. So we want to acknowledge first that we do not support this because it sets a dangerous precedent for all-out bans. It is just a building block. It will go further, and the Indiana GOP has shown themselves unreliable to stop. And then secondly, with this, we acknowledge that legislation like this is a scapegoat for actually addressing the bigger issues. Addressing the bigger issues of why a woman, when finding out her baby is diagnosed with Down syndrome, would want to abort that child, or when finding out the child is female, would want to abort that child. And then regarding this last part of the question, I'll touch on that at the end because I feel like they're kind of two separate. But with those first ones, it's a complete scapegoat for the actual issue. We acknowledge that we mustn't tackle the systemic reasons to why women feel the need to have an abortion if that is their situation. And we acknowledge that these specific bans don't do anything. In fact, they validate these pre-existing thoughts. If a child with Down syndrome is born into this world and the mother was afraid that they would not have equal access to equality, they would not have equal access to food and housing and shelter, and then all of that is validated because we have not addressed the systemic issues. We have said we have solved it because we have banned the abortion of children with Down syndrome, then that mother is completely validated in the opinion that she originally had. And we acknowledge that we must use our legislative time productively. The Indiana State Senate is evaluating the amount of pieces of legislation that legislators are able to introduce. It is not going to be unlimited anymore. In Indiana, we want to vote for legislators that are going to use that 4 to 5 pieces of legislation they can introduce in a session, that are going to use it productively, that are going to introduce legislation that addresses systemic issues to solve the problem instead of putting a Band-Aid over a severed leg. That is what we need to do when we're in the voting booth, and that harkens back to our bigger idea today. The bigger idea today is empowering y'all as voters, if you are voting, or knowing people who are voting. And the biggest common enemy that we share is someone that doesn't substantiate their opinion on abortion. Vote for candidates that you have researched and agree with you. The moral precedent of the beliefs on abortion set the way in which legislators are going to vote on things. We on the pro-choice side obviously are going to encourage you to vote for people on either side of the aisle that have substantiated claims against Senate Bill 1. But if you are pro-life, research senators who hold that belief and share it publicly. A senator who refers away from the issue is someone that is untrustworthy to represent your opinion. And that's the thing we want to end on today from this Q&A session, is remembering that you as a voter have the power for where our state is going, and you need to substantiate the people you're voting for before you get in the voting booth.
And so with that said, I think it's a proper segue there is just the overall call to action. So all this information has been conveyed, well-researched points, very scholarly points, very eloquent as well. What now? What do we do based upon the position, but also based on us as a rebuff community or community of the state of Indiana, and also as far as our nation? What are the next steps?
Have you all ever heard about voting? It's pretty cool. I don't know if you just heard my friend Claire said, but very true points. Voting is very cool, guys. If you didn't know, tomorrow's election day, so that's a very important day for all the people who are over 18, even people who are younger than that, who want their voice to be heard. This is the chance to do so. You don't have to be 18 to work at polling locations. You don't have to be 18 to help with elections. But when you are 18, you're voting, I want to emphasize exactly what Claire just said right now. Vote for the people who are going to represent your beliefs. Don't vote for people who are too scared to talk about these issues that you care about because they're scared of the backlash that might happen, if they might get removed from office, whatever that may be. Those are not people you want representing your voice in this opinion or in any other opinion that actually matters to you. Do your research, look over all the candidates, look over all their views, and determine based on that who you should be voting for and who you want to represent you in all other future Hoosiers in this election and many more. This is the most important thing we can do as youth in today's world. We need to make our voices heard, because if we're not, then how are we ever going to expect anything to change And how are we ever going to expect anything to go our way in the legislature or in society and cultural norms? This is the most important thing we can do, so we urge all of you to do so. And I'm going to pass it off to Claire a little bit. She has a few experiences and opportunities to share with you guys with the ACLU and some things of reproductive freedom and how you personally can get involved outside of just voting.
So I'm kind of looking around, and a lot of you can't vote tomorrow. I want to start with two things. All of you know someone who can vote tomorrow, and you need to have conversations with them. If you are a member of the Hoosier population who cannot vote yet, you still deserve to be represented in your legislative body. And the people you care about, if they care about you, will listen to your concerns about the future of Hoosier politics and take that into account when they go to that polling place and when they go into the voting booth. So have those important conversations. If you can't vote, there's a couple things you can do. Outside of like official organizing, watch someone's kids. If someone has a child and no babysitter, they may not want to take their kids to wait in long lines at the polls. Offer to watch someone's kids. Offer to drive someone to the polls if you have a car and they don't. Making sure we are mobilizing voters, specifically those that have least access in a society, is the way that we create the most representative legislative body that we can have here in Indiana. But on some specific organizing topics, on the pro-choice side, one of the biggest organizers for us has been the ACLU of Indiana. They are excellent. They hired recently a reproductive justice advocate specifically for that, whose contact information is on the website. Her name is Caitlin Teague. Reach out to her. The ACLU of Indiana is a small organization, so we don't necessarily have the pre-built out programs. But if you reach out saying, I have an hour to give, I have 30 minutes, I can write a postcard, I can make a phone call, they are going to find a way to help you get involved. I also recommend checking out some of the previous organizational work they've done and looking at their steps to take organizing into your own life. Look at their steps to have productive conversations about abortion. Research your stance and really have those conversations with people before they go into the voting booth if you're someone that can't vote, because you still do deserve to be represented in the Indiana state body. Just because you can't vote, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have people in your corner that are voting for your best interest. Encourage people in your life to take into account your opinions before they go into that polling place.
Yeah, so obviously I don't need to reiterate the voting thing. Obviously voting is very important, but most people in this room probably won't be able to vote. So definitely the goal of the pro-life movement is to completely eradicate abortion. And that comes through two ways. Number one, abolishing abortion and making abortion unthinkable. Meaning, abolishing abortion is the government side of things, right? What are we going to do with our laws and those kinds of things? But making abortion unthinkable is all about what we're doing on the community side of things, right? Making sure that we're making systemic changes so that people have access to excellent health care if they, find themselves in crisis pregnancies, have access to the things that they need access to if they are going to raise a kid. And so one of the things that we are very fortunate, the Right to Life Club here at Brebeuf is very fortunate to do, is partner with the organization Students for Life on an initiative called Standing With You. Standing With You is an initiative dedicated to connecting women with nonviolent, life-affirming resources. And it's really cool. They got a website, standingwithyou.org, that has resources that you can find local to particular cities, particular college campuses, all over the United States. So our goal as the pro-life movement is to make sure that women are connected to pregnancy and parenting services that are nonviolent, right? Because we don't want to just, we don't want to just leave women hanging, so to speak, with banning abortion. So we work with Students for Life on the initiative Standing With You, where we go, again, door knocking to talk about these resources to make sure, like these resources are often overlooked. Places like the Women's Care Center, which is down the road, and organizations like Let Them Live and different organizations like that, they work with women in crisis pregnancy, whether that is with healthcare, whether that is with housing, whether that is with economic plans, whether that is adoption, whether that is with different resources that they will need to get them prepared for whatever circumstance they find themselves in. We want to make sure that women are supported in these circumstances. So if you guys want to get involved with the Standing With You initiative, be sure to contact either Eric or or me, because we can definitely get you involved in that. Again, that is just an initiative to make sure that we are connecting women in our local community with life-affirming resources for pregnant and parenting mothers, because that is absolutely a very important part of our goal to end the violence of abortion in America.
And if you want to just keep talking further about abortion and hear our side and about these resources, everybody's welcome to come to a Right to Life meeting. You don't just have to be pro-life to go to one of our meetings. We're happy to have anybody. So thank you. Tuesday morning here at TC.
Before we wrap up, I just want to share a couple of short takeaways here. And these takeaways have nothing to do with the details or the specifics of your positions. But personally, I'm overwhelmed by one, all of these scholars are passionate for what they do. And that passion is not only just your strength of spirit, but also your willingness to engage in this research and to keep yourselves informed. Secondly, I would say just your heart for what you perceive as right and just for the people. I mean, your intentions, we have to assume they're good for one another. And we certainly see that in all of the women, right? And then lastly, I mean, this is like a revolution of sorts. I mean, if you think about this divisive topic that we had in front of us here, the old folks can't get this right. And I mean that not only in terms of making a decision on what is right, but also just being able to do this. Just to be able to do this. And so we certainly applaud these 8 leaders and change agents